Picture this. You are standing in your kitchen at 7 in the morning, shoes on, coffee in hand, and somewhere inside your body, a process is happening that you have never been told about. A slow, invisible process that has been running in the background of your life for years, maybe decades. Your spine is aging, not because of how old you are, not because of some genetic sentence you were handed at birth, but because of something as simple as what is on your feet. And here is the thing that will change how you think about this. The fix does not require a gym membership. It does not require equipment. It requires that you understand what your body is actually asking for. Because once you understand the mechanism, the answer becomes obvious. That is what this is about today. If you have been here before, you know we do not do surface-level wellness content. We go into the biology, the actual physics, the research that most people never see. If that is the kind of content you want in your life, hit subscribe right now and turn on notifications. Because what comes next is going to completely reframe something you do every single day without thinking about it. Let me start with the structure, because I think most people have a fundamentally incomplete picture of what the spine actually is and what it is trying to do. Your spine is not a rigid pole. It is not a straight column. It is a curved, segmented, shock-absorbing engineering system made of 33 vertebrae, stacked in an S-shaped curve that took millions of years of evolutionary pressure to arrive at. That S-curve is not a design flaw. It is not something to be corrected. It is the mechanism. It is how your spine distributes compressive force, stores and releases energy with each step, and protects your spinal cord from impact. When the curve is intact and the system is loaded correctly, your spine can handle enormous forces. When the curve collapses, when the segments start to compress and rotate in ways they were not designed for, the damage is not metaphorical, it is structural. It shows up on imaging, it shows up in pain, and it shows up in the way people move, or stop moving as they get older. Now here is where most conversations about spinal aging get it wrong. They start with the spine itself. They talk about disc degeneration, about the nucleus pulposus losing water content over time, about the facet joints developing arthritis. All of that is real. All of that happens. But it is downstream of something more fundamental. The spine does not fail in isolation. It fails because the system it depends on fails first. And that system begins at the ground, at the contact point between your body and the earth, at the soles of your feet. Your foot contains 26 bones, 33 joints, and over 100 muscles, tendons, and ligaments. That is not incidental complexity. That is a sensory and mechanical organ of extraordinary sophistication. The primary job of the foot is not just to carry weight. It is to read the ground beneath you and transmit that information upward through the entire kinetic chain of your body so that your ankle, your knee, your hip, your lumbar spine, and your thoracic spine can all make micro-adjustments in real time to maintain dynamic balance and optimal load distribution. That is happening thousands of times a day, automatically, without conscious thought, as long as the system is working. Here is the problem. The moment you put a conventional shoe on your foot, several things happen that interrupt that system. The cushioned sole reduces mechanoreceptor input. Mechanoreceptors are the sensory nerve endings embedded in the skin, muscles, and connective tissue of the foot that detect pressure, texture, vibration, and position in space. A thick rubber sole absorbs and filters the ground signal before it reaches those receptors. The elevated heel, even a modest one, shifts your center of gravity forward and changes the angle at which your entire lower body operates. Plantar fascia research, including studies published in the Journal of Foot and Ankle Research, has demonstrated that conventional footwear progressively reduces intrinsic foot muscle activation. The small muscles of the foot, the ones designed to dynamically stabilize the arch and control fine movement between the metatarsals, are simply not being asked to do their job when a rigid shoe is doing it for them. And like every biological structure that stops being used, they weaken. The arch becomes dependent on external support. The foot loses the proprioceptive acuity it was designed to maintain. And when that happens, the signal traveling up the kinetic chain becomes corrupted. The ankle, the knee, the hip, and especially the spine are now making postural corrections based on incomplete or distorted ground information. That is where the damage begins. The term kinetic chain describes something that is worth understanding in precise terms because it is the central concept that ties all of this together. Your body is not a collection of independent parts. It is a linked mechanical system in which what happens at one end influences everything else. When you stand, the force of gravity travels downward through your body, from your head through your cervical spine, through your thoracic spine, through your lumbar spine, through your pelvis, through your hip joints, through your knees, through your ankles, and into the ground through your feet. Simultaneously, the ground reaction force travels upward from the floor through that same chain in reverse. Your spine sits in the middle of that exchange. Every time the chain below the spine is misaligned, the spine compensates. And compensation in biomechanics means one structure-absorbing force that was meant to be distributed across many. A misaligned foot causes a misaligned ankle. A misaligned ankle alters knee mechanics. An altered knee changes hip position. A shifted hip rotates the pelvis. And a rotated pelvis changes the loading pattern on the lumbar vertebrae and the intervertebral discs. Dr. Shirley Sarman, a physical therapist and researcher at Washington University in St. Louis, whose work on movement impairment syndromes has influenced rehabilitation medicine for decades, has described how subtle, chronic misalignment patterns accumulate into structural damage over years. Her research makes clear that the spine does not suddenly fail. It fails through repetition, through thousands of daily loading cycles in slightly wrong directions, adding up over months and years until the disc material degrades, the facet joints inflame, and the supporting ligaments stretch beyond their functional range. The source of that chronic misalignment very often begins at the foot. That is not a fringe position. That is standard biomechanical analysis. Now let me tell you what happens when the shoe comes off, because this is the part that most people have never heard explained in biological terms. When your bare foot contacts the ground, several simultaneous processes are activated. The mechanoreceptors in the plantar surface of the foot receive a full, unfiltered signal from the ground. Pressure distribution, texture variation, microslope changes, temperature gradient. All of that information travels through afferent nerve pathways to the cerebellum and the sensorimotor cortex. Research from the University of Liverpool, published in the journal Gait and Posture, showed that barefoot walking produced significantly greater activation of postural control centers in the brain compared to shod walking, meaning the brain was processing more information and making more precise postural corrections when the foot was unmediated. That greater neural engagement has downstream consequences for the entire spine. Here is what that looks like in practice. When the foot receives accurate ground information, the intrinsic foot muscles activate appropriately, the arch dynamically stiffens and releases with each step, the ankle operates through its full range of motion, the hip extensors and abductors engage at the correct moments in the gait cycle, and the lumbar spine maintains its natural lordotic curve without chronic overcompression at the lower segments. The spine is not working against a corrupted signal. It is working with accurate information, and when it works with accurate information, it distributes load the way it was designed to. The discs are nourished by the compression and decompression cycle of proper movement. The facet joints move through their intended range. The multifidus, the deep paraspinal muscle, that is the primary stabilizer of individual vertebral segments and one of the first muscles to atrophy in chronic back pain patients, receives the correct proprioceptive cues to stay activated. There is a study worth knowing in detail here. Researchers at Harvard, including Dr. Daniel Lieberman, whose work on the biomechanics of running barefoot versus shod has become foundational in this field, demonstrated that barefoot and minimally shod populations generate different force curves during locomotion, specifically a lower impact transient, the initial spike in ground reaction force, that travels directly up the skeletal system with each foot strike. Conventional running shoes, with their elevated heels, encourage heel striking. Heel striking produces a sharp impact transient that sends a shockwave up the leg. Barefoot contact encourages forefoot and midfoot landing, which distributes that force over a larger area and across more joints, reducing the peak load on any single structure. The spine, sitting at the top of that chain, is either absorbing repeated impact spikes, or it is not, depending on what is happening at the foot. We are about halfway through this, and what is coming next is where the actual reversal mechanism becomes clear. The specific physics of how barefoot standing and movement changes what happens inside the intervertebral discs over time. If you want to be notified every time we publish something like this, subscribe now. There is a lot more where this is coming from. The intervertebral disc is one of the most misunderstood structures in the human body. Most people know it as a cushion between vertebrae, a shock absorber. That is accurate, but incomplete. The disc has a specific biological mechanism that depends entirely on movement for its health. The outer ring of the disc, the annulus fibrosus, is a layered structure of collagen fibers arranged in alternating diagonal orientations, like a radial tire, designed to handle torsional stress. The inner core, the nucleus pulposus, is a gel-like substance composed primarily of water, proteoglycans, and collagen type 2. That gel is what provides the hydraulic cushioning effect. It is what allows the disc to distribute compressive load across the entire vertebral end plate, rather than concentrating it at a single point. But here is the critical biological fact that changes everything about how you think about disc health. The disc has no direct blood supply after early childhood. Unlike most tissues in the body, the disc cannot receive nutrients through capillary circulation. It is the largest avascular structure in the adult human body. It receives its nutrients, water, oxygen, and glucose through a process called imbibition, the passive diffusion of fluid and solutes through the cartilaginous end plates that border the disc above and below. And imbibition is driven by mechanical loading and unloading. Compression squeezes metabolic waste products out of the disc. Decompression draws fresh fluid and nutrients in. The disc literally breathes through movement. When movement stops, when the compression-decompression cycle is disrupted, the disc starves. This is why prolonged sitting is so destructive to the lumbar spine. It is not simply that sitting creates static compression. It is that static compression eliminates the pumping action that keeps the disc alive. Research published in Spine, one of the leading journals in spinal medicine, has shown that disc degeneration is strongly associated with reduced movement variability, meaning spines that move through a limited range of motion in monotonous patterns degenerate faster than spines that are loaded dynamically and variably. And this is directly where barefoot standing becomes significant. Barefoot contact with the ground, even simple standing without walking, produces continuous micro-adjustments throughout the postural chain. Because the foot is receiving a rich stream of ground information, and the intrinsic muscles are actively responding, the spine never holds completely static. There is constant low-level dynamic loading, small shifts of weight distribution, micro-rotations at the ankle and hip, subtle changes in lumbar curve angle. All of that variation translates to continuous gentle compression-decompression cycles throughout the disc column. It is the opposite of static sitting. It is passive disc nourishment happening as a side effect of simply standing correctly with bare feet on a real surface. Now I want to talk about something that operates at a different scale, but is equally important. The fascial system. Fascia is the connective tissue matrix that surrounds, penetrates, and connects every muscle, bone, nerve, and organ in the body. For most of the 20th century, fascia was treated as inert packaging material, the white stuff you cut through to get to the interesting anatomy underneath. That view has been overturned by several decades of research, most notably by Dr. Robert Schleip at Ulm University in Germany, whose work on the tensegrity model of fascial mechanics has fundamentally changed how anatomists and physical therapists think about the body. Tensegrity, a term coined by architect Buckminster Fuller to describe structures that maintain their shape through continuous tension rather than through rigid compression, applies directly to the human body. Your skeleton is not a stack of blocks resting on each other. It is a tension system in which the bones are suspended in a network of fascial and muscular tension. The spine does not hold itself up through brute compression. It is held in dynamic balance by the entire fascial web that connects it to every other structure in the body, including, critically, the plantar fascia and the deep fascial lines running from the sole of the foot through the posterior chain of the leg, through the thoracolumbar fascia, and up to the cranial base. Anatomist Tom Myers, in his mapping of these fascial continuities, describes the superficial back line as a continuous sheet of fascial tension running from the plantar surface of the foot, up through the gastrocnemius and hamstrings, through the sacrotuberous ligament, up the erector spinae, over the skull, and connecting to the supraorbital ridge above the eyes. When you stand barefoot on variable terrain, this entire line is dynamically tensioned and released. It is being tuned. When you stand in a rigid-soled shoe on a flat surface, large portions of that fascial line go slack or hold chronic tension at specific segments, which translates directly into altered mechanics at the lumbar spine. Research from the journal Clinical Biomechanics has demonstrated that chronic plantar fascia restriction correlates with altered hip extension during gait, both of which are precursors to the specific disc loading patterns associated with early degeneration. Through the fascial system is physically connected to the spine, the foot, through the fascial system in a direct tensioned mechanical system. You cannot optimize one without considering the other. Let me now bring this back to the nervous system, because there is one more mechanism that I think is genuinely underappreciated in the conversation about spinal aging: proprioception. Your proprioceptive system is the sensory system that tells your brain where your body is in space. It is built from mechanoreceptors in your muscles, tendons, joint capsules, and skin. And it is the system that allows you to stand with your eyes closed without falling, to catch a glass without looking at your hand, to adjust your posture without consciously thinking about it. The proprioceptive system is also the primary input system for your postural control network, the collection of neural circuits in the brainstem and cerebellum that are continuously running in the background, making micro-corrections to keep your center of mass over your base of support. Here is what happens to proprioception as people age, and here is why it matters for the spine. Proprioceptive acuity declines with age. The mechanoreceptors become less sensitive, the afferent nerve conduction slows. The postural control network responds more slowly and less precisely. This is part of why balance declines with age and why fall risk increases. But here is the part that is directly relevant to spinal aging. Research has shown that the proprioceptive system is trainable. Its acuity can be maintained and improved with the right kind of sensory input. And the richest source of proprioceptive training available to the average person is barefoot contact with variable, natural surfaces. A study published in Age and Aging, the British Geriatric Society journal, found that older adults who regularly walked barefoot on natural terrain showed significantly better static and dynamic balance compared to those who wore conventional footwear on flat surfaces. Better balance means better postural control. Better postural control means more precise continuous adjustment of spinal loading. More precise spinal loading means less chronic abnormal compression on the discs and facet joints. This is the literal physics of reversal. It is not metaphorical. When the proprioceptive system is more accurate, when the spine is loaded more correctly, the discs receive better imbibition cycles. When the discs receive better imbibition, they maintain hydration and structural integrity longer. Degeneration slows. Sometimes early stages remodeling occurs. The biology is not passive. The system responds. There is one additional dimension of barefoot contact that the research on earthing and grounding has begun to document, and I want to address it precisely because it is often sensationalized in ways that undermine its credibility. The Earth's surface carries a mild negative electrical charge. When the bare skin of the foot contacts the ground, there is an equalization of charge between the body and the earth. This is not mystical. It is basic physics. The human body accumulates a positive charge through normal metabolic activity, through electromagnetic exposure, and through the friction of moving in insulated footwear across synthetic surfaces. Studies published in the Journal of Inflammation Research, including a clinical study by Chevalier and colleagues, have documented that grounding reduces inflammatory markers in human subjects, specifically C-reactive protein and interleukin-6, which are systemic markers of chronic low-grade inflammation. Chronic low-grade inflammation is one of the primary drivers of disc degeneration, facet joint deterioration, and the sensitivity changes in spinal nerve roots that translate mechanical compression into pain. This mechanism is still being studied. The research is not definitive, but the signal is consistent, and the mechanism is physically plausible. Now let me put all of this together in practical terms, because understanding the mechanism is only valuable if it changes what you actually do. The goal is not to never wear shoes. The goal is to restore the proprioceptive and mechanical function of the foot systematically, and then allow that restoration to propagate up through the kinetic chain to benefit the spine. Start with morning barefoot standing. Before you put shoes on in the morning, spend 10 to 15 minutes standing barefoot on a natural surface. Grass is ideal. Concrete or wood floor is fine. The point is unmediated ground contact and natural postural micro-adjustment. This does not need to be a dedicated exercise. It can happen while you make breakfast, while you drink your coffee, while you read. The foot muscles are activating, Mechanoreceptors are receiving input. The fascial backline is being gently tensioned and released. This is passive benefit from a simple change. Introduce natural surface walking as a regular practice. A 15 to 30-minute barefoot walk on uneven natural terrain, grass, packed dirt, gravel if your foot condition allows, provides a level of proprioceptive and fascial training that no flat surface can replicate. The variability of the surface is the point. Every step requires micro-adjustment at the foot, which cascades upward through the kinetic chain. Begin gradually if your feet have spent years in conventional footwear. The intrinsic foot muscles need time to strengthen. The plantar fascia needs time to adapt. Going from years of cushioned shoes to long barefoot walks on hard surfaces too quickly risks plantar fasciitis and other overuse injuries that will set you back rather than forward. If full barefoot walking is not practical or comfortable for your lifestyle, minimal footwear, shoes with thin flexible soles, zero heel drop, and a wide toe box that allows natural toe splay preserves most of the barefoot benefit. The Vibram 5-finger Zero shoes and similar minimal footwear lines exist precisely to provide the sensory and mechanical characteristics of barefoot contact within a form that is socially and practically compatible with most environments. Finally, and this is perhaps the most impactful change for most people, examine your indoor footwear. The average American spends approximately 90% of their time indoors. If you are wearing stiff-soled slippers or shoes inside your home, you are spending 90% of your time suppressing the foot mechanics that would otherwise be constantly working to maintain your spinal kinetic chain. Going barefoot at home, even on flat indoor surfaces, provides continuous low-level intrinsic foot muscle activation that compounds over weeks and months into measurably better lower extremity mechanics and proprioceptive sensitivity. Here is the thing about structural change in the body. It is slow by nature. The disc does not rehydrate overnight. The intrinsic foot muscles do not rebuild in a week. The fascia does not remodel in a month. The timescales of connective tissue change are measured in months and years, not days. But so is damage. The disc degeneration that shows up on an MRI at 50 was built through decades of cumulative incorrect loading, through thousands of daily repetitions of corrupted ground signal, traveling up through a kinetic chain that was never properly calibrated. The reversal works on the same timescale. Studies tracking barefoot interventions in older adults have documented measurable improvements in gait mechanics, postural control, and lower limb proprioceptive acuity within 8 to 12 weeks of consistent practice. Research from the University of the Witwatersrand in South Africa, which studied habitually barefoot populations across multiple decades, found dramatically lower rates of hallux valgus, flat foot deformity, and degenerative joint disease in the lower extremity compared to habitually shod populations. The biology of the foot and the spine is responsive. It is not fixed. That is the extraordinary truth underneath all of this. You are not locked into the trajectory your spine is currently on. You are not simply aging and waiting for the degree of degeneration that your genetics or your past habits have predetermined. Every morning when you step out of bed, you have a choice that your body is asking you to make. A choice about what signal you give the ground reading system at the base of your kinetic chain, and therefore what information your spine receives about how to distribute the force of being alive in a body that is standing upright against gravity. That is not a small choice. It is a foundational one. This is the kind of content that takes real time to research and put together, and it only reaches people who need it when the algorithm sees engagement. If this changed how you think about your body, even a little, drop a comment below. Tell me what surprised you most. Share it with someone you know who has been dealing with back pain, because most of them have never heard any of this explained in these terms. And if you want to keep going deeper into the actual biology of how your body works and what you can do to work with it instead of against it, this channel is where that happens. Subscribe, stay with us, and we will keep building this together. Your body has been waiting for you to understand it. Now you do.